Pleasure to be back in the Southeastern California Conference and to worship with the saints at Corona this morning. I saw it the first time a number of years ago in New York City. A group of us were there at a seminar, walking down the street near Times Square. I saw up ahead a group of young teenage boys. They were looking up at the sky. Some of them were pointing. And as we came walking down the street, you know what we did? We looked up to see what they were looking at. And when they saw us looking, they started laughing and pointing their fingers at us. There wasn't anything to see. They were just getting us to follow what they were doing just for kicks. Our scripture this morning mentions an experience, the last experience actually that Christ had with his disciples on earth before returning to heaven. And as he was there with them on the Mount of Olives, he left them. And the disciples watched him disappear. Two angels in white apparel came and said, "Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye here gazing up into heaven?" I propose to you the question the angels asked the disciples that day are questions that we must deal with. You'll recall the experience, I'm certain, these last few hours and minutes that Christ had with his disciples. For 3.5 years he had worked with them, had labored with them, had preached with them, and had healed those who had sicknesses of all kinds. They thought, those who followed him, that he would be the one who would free them from the Roman bondage and would set up a new kingdom. They had hoped that he might indeed be the promised Messiah. But after 3.5 years, they went through the agony of Gethsemane. They saw him crucified, and their hopes died as he died. And 3 days later, when the announcement was made that he was resurrected, their hopes again flashed that maybe he might even now set up the kingdom. Then he led them to the Mount of Olives. For the last time, he met them face to face. And as he talked with them, he tried to recount again his mission and their commission. And as he was talking with them, he started to rise. And I've often wondered, where was Peter? He was always loud. You could hear him wherever he was. But there is nothing recorded of Peter having anything to say at this moment. I could almost picture Peter, the impetuous fellow that he was, jumping off the rock where he was undoubtedly sitting and saying, "Look, if you're going to leave, I'm going to go along, and hang on, I'm going to go with you." But there isn't anything recorded of Peter. The beloved John. They all just watched, not wanting to believe their eyes that he would be taken away from them again. And as they watched, he went higher and higher until a cloud hid their view of him, and they just stood there transfixed, watching. And as they were there watching, the angels came and said, "Why stand ye gazing?" I would propose to you that those crude, illiterate Galileans, despised and disappointed, rejecting, were standing there watching. Had they done nothing more than just stand there and watch, the gospel would never have been carried to all the world, and the dynamic impress that those men later left on the earth would never have happened had they simply stood there watching. There were some who heard them who doubted. And in the providence of God, he has never removed the possibility of doubt. And there are those today who would doubt. But the angels said to those disciples that day, "Why stand watching? And I propose that they had to deal with that question on three levels. They had to satisfy their curiosity. They had to confirm their faith. And in response, they had to test their loyalty. And I propose to you that we who stand watching today must also deal with those same questions. Why stand gazing like Galileans, rude and unpolished men, gazing up into heaven as though frightened men and perplexed, as astonished men at their wits' end? That was the disciples. I propose to you that there are many professed Christians today who are simply gazing, watching. And the people around us point at us and laugh because we have such an otherworldly view that we don't see anything or anybody around us. And we have become spectacles of mockery, simply satisfying our curiosity. When I lived in Portland, Oregon, I used to drive to the office each morning down Gleason Street. I don't think I'm an impatient person. At least I don't try to show it. But I must confess, every morning on my way to the office, I had a little battle to fight. I don't know how many stoplights there were from 168th, where we left, down to 39th Street, where the conference office was located. But invariably, every morning, there was somebody squandering my time. You would think an individual that had driven an automobile very long and recognized stoplights, that when you see the walk turn to wait, you know that it's not going to be many seconds until the green turns yellow and ultimately red, and you'll stop. And I got impatient behind those automobiles as drivers, not watching the things about them, not looking at the lights, but driving down Gleason Street, watching all the things that were going on in the stores. And I thought, brother, why don't you watch what's going on? Just curiosity seekers. That's one reason I don't like to go shopping with my wife. If I go shopping, I pretty much know what I want to buy. I know about what I'm going to pay, and I pretty well know where it's located in the store. And I get exasperated with the people who are in the store just looking. And generally they look out in the middle of the hall. You know, if they were going to look, if they'd stand off to the side and get out of the road of the traffic, that wouldn't be so bad. But they stand out in the middle of all this traffic, and they're just looking, not wanting to buy. And I think if I were a salesperson, and these people looking and fondling everything, and could I help you? No, I'm just looking. I think I would have to take coke several times a day to deal with that kind of thing. There are a lot of religious curiosity seekers as well. If there were to be announced that precisely tomorrow morning at 6:33 in the morning there would be a tidal wave hit Long Beach, what would happen? Millions of people would want to go down there and see what that water looks like when it hits. Wouldn't they? When I hear a fire siren, there stirs within me, I want to know where the fire is, and I'd like to go watch it burn. I propose to you that there are a lot of people who go to church each week simply to see whether the preacher could keep them awake. Curiosity seekers, playing games with this thing we call religion. But I would propose to you this morning that divine revelation has never been able to satisfy human curiosity. And when those angels stood by those disciples on the Mount of Olives, and they said, "Why do you religious people stand here looking?" That's not the dynamics of Christianity, simply to be a spectator. And I propose to you that there are some of us who profess to be God's remnant people, members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who proclaim His return, We're simply still curios, playing with religion as though it were something you see at a museum. Why stand ye looking? We've got to deal with the curiosity question. But the dynamics of religion does not come through to curiosity seekers. You don't buy it by looking. You don't own it by playing games. And it is not yours simply because you handle it. Matthew Henry has said of those disciples as they stood there listening to the angel as they gazed up into heaven. The angel said to this same Jesus whom you are looking thus long after, wishing you had him with you again is not gone forever. For there is a day appointed in which he will come in like manner, and you must not expect him back until that appointed day. They had to confirm their faith as we must confirm our faith. Without faith, it is impossible. If you do not have faith, it is impossible to do anything. If you do not believe, you cannot do. The man who cannot do does not believe. A little book, Desire of Ages, page 819. There are those who find it hard to exercise faith, and they place themselves on the doubting side. These lose much because of their unbelief. Those of us who profess that he's coming again, and that has been the sustaining hope of the Christian family since that day the angel said he would come again. And it is that sustaining hope that ought to bind us together and recognize that we ought to be confirming our faith. As we look at the things that are transpiring about us today, what do you think is the future of the human race? And I would tell you this morning, without the faith in the soon coming of Christ, I don't know how I could handle the pressures of this day. The Seventh-day Adventist Church in America have been reminded that at this day we ought to pray about our environment. And Seventh-day Adventists are authorities on biblical prophecy. We could talk about the sun, moon, and stars and all of those climactic events that took place back in 1833 and 1830. But I would propose to you that that's what's happening in our sky today in 1976 and 1977 and 1980 are far more relevant than the stars falling that our forefathers witnessed. For our environment with all of its contamination, and I believe that no scientist will ever again clean up our atmosphere. Never again will we have the pure food and the abundance of water and all of those other things. With the multiplying of the human family, for at precisely this second tomorrow there will be another 200,000 people on planet Earth to eat our food, to drink our water, and to consume our air. We will never again get another cubic foot of air than what we have today. Not another drop of water but what this planet has now. And those of the individuals who are skeptics and say the end will not happen, and there has always been a fanatic group who have talked about the end of the world, I would say to you that if it is not in the second coming of Christ, this planet Earth has no hope at all. The imperialistic demands that are made by those nations who look at us with all of our consuming of natural resources, they hate us with a passion. In the last 2 years, it's been our privilege to visit some 25 countries outside of America. And America has hated the world over not because of a difference in political ideology, but we are hated because we are among the very, very few people on earth who can dump food in a garbage can. For most of the world is starving to death while we have it to squander. And I would propose to you that it is precisely that problem that is dashing us, this planet Earth, into the greatest crisis that can be imagined. And if we think we've had it bad with our fellow Californians in the north hating Southern Californians because we can have a little water to put on a swimming pool or the lawn, it is only the beginning of what's going to happen as more human beings consume food, air, and water. Those of us who stand gazing, if we cannot see the heralding of the advent of Christ, then we indeed are to be pitied. For the very things that we read about in our newspaper and the events that are transpiring in our world, I'm convinced, ought to be confirming the faith in the advent. I'm an Adventist, and I thank God for the blessed hope that is ours, to know that we are not on a crash course with destiny that will wipe human beings off this planet. But I know that there is a God in heaven who has a divine plan. And in that plan, he said when Christ was here, let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. For in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and thank God for that promise. And I stand gazing today to confirm my faith. And I sing often the words of the little song, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. I believe the only way we can put it together today, with all the multiplicity of problems and perplexities that are faced by modern mankind, is only to turn our eyes upon Jesus. And I stand looking today to look full in his wonderful face. I think the words that the Master taught when he was here, to say, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That prayer will be answered as I stand looking and gazing for the return of my Lord and Master. What does Christ really mean? What about this faith? I propose to you today that religion has to become that dynamic in our lives that helps us understand that life is not simply a perplexed puzzle that we try to put the pieces together, but that in the final analysis, our God has a plan and we simply relate by faith to that plan. But without faith, everything is impossible. Without faith, you cannot believe in tomorrow. Without faith, you cannot believe in the challenges that are presented in our world. Without faith, you cannot believe in the youth of this generation. But with faith, all things are possible. Why are you looking to heaven? Friend, I will tell you why I look. It is to testify that I have a faith that's alive and vibrant in my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and his Father God. The angel said, why stand looking? This same Jesus who has given you your charge will come again to call you to an account how you must perform your trust. The third element is a recognition that when we answer the question, why stand here gazing, it is a test of loyalty. The Master said as he talked to his disciples to go to Jerusalem, to Judea, and to every part of the earth. He said, go ye therefore into all the world. It is a fatal mistake, we read in Desire of Ages, to suppose that the work of saving souls depends alone on the ordained minister. All to whom the heavenly inspiration has come are to put trust in the gospel. Some of you this morning may have come to satisfy a curiosity to see what the preacher can do and to challenge him to try to keep you awake. You could play games with religion. Some of you may have come to have your faith recharged, but I would propose that all of you must face ultimately the test of loyalty. For your religion finally will be judged not by that of the preacher, but that which has taken hold of your own life. For the Master said, "Ye are my witnesses." And there are some of us who simply play the role of a lawyer. But in the final analysis, God did not retain any of us as lawyers, but He has subpoenaed every Christian to be His witness. And it is imperative that the dynamics of our faith is recognized by the dynamics of our witness. How do you make this thing work? That was the question of a young American soldier in Vietnam. In the heat of battle, he was in his foxhole, and a chaplain came by, and this young Catholic American soldier had the crucifix in his hand. He felt the end had come. He had been wounded, and he was certain that death was at the door. And he looked at that crucifix as he turned to the chaplain, and he said, "Sir, how do you make that thing work?" We may not have a crucifix in our hands, but I would propose to you that the religion that we embraced ought to be working for us. And the ultimate test of that is, what has it done for you? I can tell you this morning that I've seen religion work. I have felt it work in my own life. Just a little over a year ago, we were in Europe. We visited some of the socialist countries of Europe. And there I saw religion work. I saw Seventh-day Adventism at work. And ironically, today, religion is working more in the socialist countries than it is in the affluent West. We went to Hungary. And as we neared the Hungarian border, Seventh-day Adventist minister who had been captured 7 times by the Gestapo during World War II said to us who were traveling with him, "You capitalist Americans, you're about to enter another world. And I would suggest you keep every capitalistic remark to yourself." And we discovered that indeed, going past the pillboxes, the no man's land, and the barbed wire, where guard dogs and pistols were obvious, we knew that we had entered another world. As we visited, we asked our young in-tourist guide, a young lady in her 20s, if we might visit a Seventh-day Adventist church. And our friend who had been captured by the Gestapo whispered to us it would be better for us not to visit. We didn't know. But after a while, our in-tourist guide came out with a smile and said, "Yes, it is all right. They've invited us to come." So we went to what we discovered was the Union headquarters of the Hungarian Seventh-day Adventist Mission in Budapest. Inside, we met a gentleman who had introduced himself as the vice president of the church. It was a church just a little smaller than the Corona church here this morning. He refused to use the young in-tourist guide as his interpreter, but got one of the secretaries from his office to serve as our interpreter. And I almost broke out in a cold sweat as the young in-tourist guide stood there listening. And he explained what it was like to live in a communist country. He mentioned how that on 4 occasions the Communist Party had closed down the operation of that Seventh-day Adventist church. He talked about how it was like to grow up in that area. For he said, "I grew up as a boy. And there was a time when it was illegal for my mother to bring me to this church for worship. And he said, we came early on Sabbath morning. And he pointed to the back of the organ that was at the left. And he said, my mother used to come and hide us here. And we participated in Sabbath school and church as we were hidden. He told what it was like as a teenager when he was secretly baptized. And I wondered, how are we going to respond? And we Americans, we Adventist Americans, sometimes think that our religion is real when we pay the dues, our tithes and offerings, as Brother Foose indicated this morning. However, we had a jolt when we Americans said, would it be all right for us to take an offering to leave with you? He said, no. We don't need nor can we accept your money. It was sobering. When we were aware that there were thousands of Seventh-day Adventists in Hungary, while in the West they counted them by the scores. We had seen the large Hungarian choir, the Czechoslovak choir, and the Polish choir at Vienna General Conference. And we caught the impact of a group of people who met the test. Before we left, somebody said, could we have prayer together? He said, yes, please let us pray. And we knelt together in that church and had prayer. Some of us, as we whispered, walking back out of the church, said, we wonder what that young communist girl is going to say. For we were very much aware that they lived in a different system. We shall never forget when we got back on the bus, she picked up the microphone for the intercom. She said, I have never been in a Seventh-day Adventist church before. She said, it's obvious that you people have a very deep love for your Hungarian brethren. And I want to thank you for the beautiful service that was my privilege to witness. I would like to go back again. Why stand ye gazing? The angels that ask the question then will ask it again. And it will be a test of our loyalty that will ultimately determine the answer to the question. I've seen it happen, and it wasn't playing games. It came in familiar and maybe strange circumstances at times. We were in Arizona. There were a couple little boys by the name of John that lived near us and were playmates of our young Ron. Little John, as we called him, belonged to the Catholic family down two houses. He was one of the professors at Tempe State University. The other, Big John, lived kitty corner across from us. He was the son of a Presbyterian elder. Little John used to come to our house and join Ron in listening to the Bible stories. We were afraid that the parents who were Catholics might feel that we were trying to proselyte that young son of theirs. So my wife finally explained to her what was happening. She said, Shirley, not only does little John like being there, but I like to come to your home as well. Because she said, you know, I find a peace in your house that I don't find anywhere else. I just enjoy coming over. We're glad that little John likes to come and we like to be with him. But Big John, he was a fellow that made him a little obnoxious, I felt at times. We had an extra refrigerator out in the garage, and you know, over in Scottsdale and Phoenix, it gets hot, real hot. And Big John discovered that out in the refrigerator at the Blehm's garage were some things that were cool and good to have. And so he made himself at home. He walked into our house as though he belonged there, and at times we didn't mind. One day he was standing in the kitchen watching Mrs. Blehm get dinner ready. And my wife sensed that this young boy was staring a hole through her. Finally, my wife said, "John, what are you looking at?" And in the innocence of uninhibited youth, he said, "Mrs. Blehm, are those real potatoes?" As she was standing there peeling the potatoes, she said, "Well, John, of course. What do you expect?" "Well," he said, "you people eat fakey everything else. We thought you ate fakey potatoes, too." I propose to you that there are a lot of people out there that are looking at us, and the ultimate test is going to come when they discover what's inside. Is it just a fakey thing? Later on, it was interesting. Big John's parents called us up to come to their place to eat dinner. We had had some other embarrassing situations with spiked eggnog at their house and getting out of drinking coffee and a few other things, walking that tightrope. We went to their house, and everything that there was could be eaten without any problem or embarrassment. But something happened at that table of the Presbyterian family that has never happened to us before. The father turned to his teenage daughter and he said, "You know, Walt is the bishop for the Adventist church." She blinked, shook. "Are you a bishop?" You see, she had never seen my collar turned around. I said, "Well, your dad might call me a bishop. In our church, they call me the conference president, the elder." Then he turned to me and he said, "Walt, I would like for you to offer a prayer on my family, and then I'll ask the blessing on the food." When we left Phoenix, and we've lived in many communities, oftentimes predominantly Adventist communities, but I've never had an experience of the community coming out and weeping so much as we did that day we left. I propose to you that people in our neighborhood are making a determination of our faith by the kind of lives we live. Why stand ye gazing? Everywhere there is a tendency, we are told, to substitute the work of organization for individual effort. Multitudes leave to institutions and organizations the work of benevolence. They excuse themselves from contact with the world, and their hearts grow cold. That, I propose to you, is the Laodicean condition, because we isolate ourselves in our own little Adventist cells. And people have to break us down in order to get acquainted with the thing that we represent. They become self-absorbed and unimpressionable, Ellen White says. Love for God and man dies out of the soul. Christ commits to his followers an individual responsibility, a work that cannot be done by proxy. It is individual effort. Personal sacrifice is required for the gospel. Why stand ye gazing? What more do you want to see? What more must you have asked? May God help us to know that serving him is not enough to simply stand looking into the clouds, to satisfy a human curiosity. But may we look at the things that are transpiring to confirm our faith and to be ready to meet the ultimate test when he shall say, "Blessed are ye, enter into the joys of thy Lord."